Hey everyone, so I have some thoughts that I want to share about the 10 virgins parable from the Bible. And I recorded these thoughts the other day, and my original thought was to just all have it in one video, kind of separated into different sections, different chapters that I would share. But it took a little bit longer to share my thoughts than I thought it would. I mean, I had a lot of thoughts written down and a lot of different things compiled and things that I wanted to share. And I thought that it might be a little bit too big, all put together. It ended up being like 3 hours kind of in total. So I thought it would be better to just chop it up into smaller sections. It'd be a little bit easier to digest that way, and perhaps be a little bit less overwhelming. So you might recognize in the videos that follow here, I'm going to kind of put them together as a series. Or I might even like kind of create like a playlist or a sub playlist or something, but I'll have them kind of linked together. But I am going to do them as separate videos uploaded separately to YouTube here. But in some of the way that I talk, you might recognize like it sounds like my original plan was to kind of have it all as one video. But I am going to chop it up. So without further ado, we'll start with the first section, and then there should be 5 different sections that discuss different elements, and those will be in separate videos that I will just kind of link together. I'll put a little prompt at the end of each video to watch the next one in succession if you're interested and if you want to watch that section. Of course, you can watch different sections separately. They do kind of relate to each other, and there is a little bit of a logic behind the order that I put them in and why I did it that way. But of course, you're more than able to watch them however you want to. But yeah, just a little introduction, and hopefully that helps clear things up a little bit. And without further ado, let's jump into that first section. Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Powerful Perspectives. I would like to talk to you today about one of the parables from the Bible. It's the parable of the 10 virgins. I had a chance recently to watch a conference talk, a general conference talk, that kind of discussed this parable in detail and kind of applied it to our modern day life. And it got me reflecting on some of my own thoughts and perspectives and reflections that I've had about this parable over the years. I remember sitting in a Sunday school class maybe a year and a half ago, somewhere in there, and we were discussing this parable, the parable of the 10 virgins. And I had a thought come to me that was a little bit, I'll say unconventional, a little bit different from how we normally think of the parable or how we normally interpret it or kind of internalize it, what we normally take from it. And so I shared that, and a lot of people liked the thought, the perspective, the insight, and it just kind of got me thinking. And then this last time, just like this past week, as I've been thinking about this parable again, there have been a couple other ideas and insights and thoughts and reflections and questions that have kind of just come to me as I've pondered this parable. So what I would like to do today is discuss a few different things. I'd like to discuss 5 ways that the wise virgins, so the 5 wise virgins that we can kind of title them, the wise and the foolish virgins. I want to discuss 5 ways that the wise virgins were wise. Then I want to discuss 5 ways that the foolish virgins were actually wise. Then I want to discuss 5 ways that the foolish virgins were foolish. Then I want to discuss 5 ways that we are actually foolish. And then I want to discuss at the end 10 ways. I was going to do 5 like all the way across, but I figured it's best really to do 10 ways that we can and need to be wise, taken both from the ways that the foolish virgins were wise, but also the ways that the wise virgins were wise, and kind of applying that to ourselves. So that's kind of how I'm going to break up this video today. It will probably be a little bit longer. If you, I mean, watch it. Like, if you're interested, like, I hope that you do, and that you're able to glean something interesting and insightful from this. Break it up into smaller bits and watch it over a period of time if you want to, or you can change the speed to like double speed or 1.5 or whatever if you want to watch it faster. I know that I'm a bit of a slow speaker sometimes, but I do want to kind of dig into this and kind of get deeply into it. I have written down a lot of my notes and reflections as I've been thinking about this, so I apologize. A lot of this is going to be scripted just because I had a lot of insights and thoughts and everything. I kind of just wrote it all down. And I don't have it all memorized. It's a lot of information. So I will be reading probably a lot from my computer here, and the fan might go off sometimes, and that hopefully it won't disturb the video too much. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so 5 ways that the wise virgins were wise. Normally when we think of the wise virgins, or those that we kind of label the wise virgins, right, those who brought extra oil with them, we really just look at one defining feature that makes them wise, right? And that being that they were better prepared, in their anticipation of the bridegroom. They looked ahead and they prepared by bringing extra oil, right? This is kind of like the big differentiating factor between the wise and the foolish. And we assume, or we just kind of look at this and say, okay, this is how the wise virgins were wise. But I think there are other ways that they are wise too, and I want to dig into that. So that is the first one. The first of the 5 ways that these virgins were wise is that they did look ahead in anticipation, and they prepared by bringing extra oil, right? So they weren't lazy or complacent, and they were proactive, much rather. And again, this is normally kind of the only attribute that we really think of as why or how the 5 wise virgins were wise. Another way that they were wise is that they didn't underestimate the waiting time. And we'll compare this to the foolish virgins in a minute. But this is another really big way, I think, that the 5 wise virgins were wise. They recognized that the oil that was already in their lamps probably wouldn't be sufficient to carry them through the whole night, and through the time that they would need it for being able to receive the bridegroom and attend the party. And so they looked ahead and they brought extra oil that was necessary to make sure that they would be able to make it through the night, right? They didn't know necessarily how long they would have to wait prior to being able to be admitted into the feast to celebrate with the bridegroom. But they came not only prepared by bringing extra oil, but they didn't underestimate the potential waiting time, right? And this is another huge way that they were wise. They anticipated the wait, and they anticipated the challenges and struggles that might accompany that waiting period. And this is another wise and differentiating factor, I think, from the other 5. The third point that I would draw out in how the wise virgins were wise is that they knew the bridegroom, and they knew and understood his character. They knew and understood his boundaries, his expectations, his requirements, and how he operates. And this, again, like, it's a little bit more subtle or subdued maybe, but it's definitely something that's highlighted in the parable when we read it, is that the foolish virgins are said not to have known the Savior. And we'll get into that in a minute again. But the wise virgins, they did know him. And so the foolish virgins, they came and they knocked on the door late, hoping to still be admitted into the feast, right? And we're told but that the bridegroom kind of opens the door and says, in the King James Version, it's written there, I've never known you, or I don't know you. Modern Revelation clarifies and tells us that the correct rendition is actually, you don't know me. or ye know me not, right? And so there's a difference here. It's not that the Savior doesn't know these people, doesn't know who they are. Rather, it's that they don't know him, right? And by knowing him, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail too, it's not knowing who he is or like knowing things about him, like knowing his name or whatever. It's that they didn't know his character. They didn't know how he operates. They didn't know his personality. They didn't know the rules and precepts that he lives by. And the wise virgins, they did know this, right? They knew how he was, or who he was. They knew how he operates. And thus they knew and understood that late admission to the feast would not be allowed. They knew that it couldn't be allowed. It would be outside of his character to make an exception like that. And so they knew that the late admission wouldn't be granted, right? And they knew that because they knew the Savior and they knew his character, they knew how he operates. And so their knowledge of Christ's character and his operations inspired their care and proper preparation for making it there on time and prepared, right? Number 4 reason for why or how the wise virgins were wise is they set healthy and appropriate personal boundaries and were firm in communicating and defending these. So the example here is by not giving the 5 foolish virgins of their oil, right? The 5 virgins who didn't bring extra oil, when their lamps were about to go out, they said, hey, our lamps are about to go out. We need more oil, like give us some of yours, right? And the 5 wise virgins said, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, right? And so they said no, right? And you can look at this and you can think, okay, well, they were just being cruel or mean or whatever. They weren't. They recognized the need for personal preparation, and they understood principle and law and how things work, but they recognized personal responsibility, right? And so it wasn't cruelty or meanness. It was a healthy and appropriate, wise and informed response to set that boundary, right? They communicated their decision. They communicated the reason why, and then they recommended an alternative, right? So they said, not so, like we're not going to give you of our oil. They gave the reason, there won't be enough for all of us if we do that. And then they gave an alternative. They said, go instead and seek out the vendors and buy for yourself, right? And so I think this is a very wise, very mature, very healthy way of dealing with potential conflict, or with those who try to take what isn't theirs, right? Who try to kind of ride off of our preparation or benefits, right, from others. There needs to be clear boundaries set, and it's not cruel, it's actually necessary, and it's actually one of the kindest things that you can do for people. So recognizing that. And then finally, number 5, in terms of how the wise virgins were wise, is they recognized that you cannot make your way to the bridegroom or the Savior on borrowed light. So they understood that borrowed light isn't sufficient. The light has to be your own. And the same is true with our faith, with our testimonies, with our morals and values, our hope. All of these things, like, they need to be our own. It's not enough to rely on someone else's. It can take us a certain distance, right? And it may seem on the outside like we're able to operate just fine, borrowing someone else's light, in the literal or metaphoric sense, right? In the symbolic sense especially. But that only takes us so far. and especially like for children, you know, like as children are developing their own light, their own testimonies, their own faith, like it's necessary to have parents, leaders, trusted friends, you know, to have a supportive community that they can rely on and lean on. But eventually, each and every one of us needs to find our own. And if we don't, we won't have what we need to survive, right? We've been warned about this by recent like prophets and revelation. Like, if we don't have our own personal relationship with the Spirit of God, then we won't be able to survive these last days spiritually. The things that are coming in our world today, we won't be able to survive them. So I wrote here a kind of another thought as well, and this is just Brandon's ruminations, right? This is the gospel according to Brandon. This is not necessarily doctrine, although I think it's based in principle that is doctrinally sound, but this is more, it's speculation, right? It's looking behind, it's looking at potential additional interpretations if we look a little bit deeper. I'm not saying that these next points, or at least this next one here that I'm going to share before switching to the next section, they're not there in the parable itself. But if we think beyond what's just written there, and we take the parable seriously and we apply it and we look at circumstances and everything, it could be insightful. And that is the idea that the 5 foolish virgins could have potentially followed the 5 wise. So let's say like the 5 wise are there, they have their lamps, right? And who knows like how narrow or wide the streets were and everything. Like I have been in Jerusalem, in Old City Jerusalem, and surrounding. Like I've been to Israel. It's a beautiful experience that I've been blessed to have. And depending on where you are, like the streets can be broader or not so much. And who knows exactly where this parable is actually set. It's more of a hypothetical parable, right? We're not told where it takes place necessarily, but let's say that you have like the 5 virgins who all have their lamps, right? And each lamp casts a certain glow, right? And collectively, there's a certain brightness in addition to what they have individually, right? With their lamps. But let's say like those 5 virgins who do have extra oil and whose lamps are working, they go ahead, right? And let's say that the 5 virgins who don't have extra oil or whose oil is about to run out, they follow behind and they stay together as a pack, right? The 5 virgins who had extra oil potentially could have just gone ahead and led the way, right? And the 5 virgins who didn't could have followed, hypothetically, right? And then they all would have arrived at the gate on time, and the 5, or they would have arrived at the gate on time with the 5 wise, because they had followed behind. But then my suspicion is they still wouldn't have been allowed to participate fully in the feast. They might have been able to participate in some small way, but I don't think they would have been able to participate fully. It's this idea of celestial versus terrestrial versus telestial kingdoms, right? Different kingdoms of glory, different degrees of glory within heaven, right? Based on our preparedness, based on our faithfulness, based on our sacrifice and our effort, right? Potentially, like we might be able to look at these, at those who didn't bring extra oil for their lamps, and maybe they would have been able to receive like a terrestrial type glory, or like participate in a portion of the feast, but not necessarily the same fullness as those who had brought extra light for their lamps. I think the character of Christ would still be required by justice to make a distinction between those who had put in that extra effort and tried and really pushed themselves versus those who hadn't to the same extent, right? There would need to be some sort of separation. And it might be a separation in terms of glory within the celestial kingdom. We know that there are different degrees of glory within the celestial kingdom as well. But there might have been some sort of differentiation there, right? But again, because of the character of Christ, he probably couldn't allow for the same level of blessings to be given to both groups. But in that way, you know, they could have still arrived on time, hypothetically. But yeah, I have written here, they wouldn't be able to participate fully in the feast because they did not put in the personal effort, preparation, and sacrifice. And these might be similar to those who inherit the terrestrial kingdom but cannot inherit the fullness of the celestial because they cannot abide the fullness of celestial law. See Doctrine and Covenants 76, 71 to 80. So yeah, just some additional thoughts, reflections, speculations about that hypothetical. But those are the 5 ways that I think that the wise virgins were wise.